circumstances of truly massive amounts of stress, glucocorticoids can actually kill neurons in the hippocampus. And even better documented, lots of stress, lots of glucocorticoids can endanger hippocampal neurons and make it harder for those neurons to survive all sorts of insults. So what you wind up getting in the realm of glucocorticoids is that these stress hormones can disrupt aspects of synaptic plasticity, can cause the neurons to retract their processing, can cause the neurons to fail to be born. You look at adult neurogenesis, can make the neurons more fragile in the face of all sorts of traumas, and maybe even at an extreme might kill the neurons. So you sit there and you say, uh-oh, this is not a good thing. Does this mean prolonged stress does bad stuff in your hippocampus? There's beginning to be reasons to think that this story, mostly a laboratory rat story, begins to apply to the human brain. There's three circumstances in which this is relevant, and they're of increasingly bad news. The first one is a fairly rare endocrine disorder called Cushing's disease. You get a tumor in some weird, unexpected place in the body, and even more bizarrely, this tumor, often in the lungs of all places, secretes some hormones that stimulate glucocorticoid release. You get elevated glucocorticoid levels, all sorts of things go wrong. In Cushing's disease, one of the things that happens, though, is you begin to get severe memory problems. It's in fact called Cushingoid dementia. And the first few brain imaging studies are now being done showing people with Cushing's disease begin to get atrophy of their hippocampus. Their hippocampus shrinks. It seems to only be the hippocampus. The higher the glucocorticoid levels, the more shrinkage and the more memory problems. Now, how fast does this affect? The best guesses are it emerges over the course of a couple of years. Is this due to killing the neurons? Almost certainly not, because what the most recent studies are showing is when you go in and you correct the tumor, within the next year or so, the hippocampus comes back to normal size. What's that about? That's the flip side of what we've heard already. Lots of stress and glucocorticoids, and those hippocampal neurons have their dendritic processes shrivel up. End of stress, end of glucocorticoid exposure, and very slowly they can regenerate. The next model is worsenings. Simply for the number of people involved, people with a history of severe stress, people with PTSD, post-traumatic stress